there. You're watching All 24 News World News program broadcasting to you live from Algiers, and up next are tonight's top stories. Zionist bombings rage on in Shujaia for the second day. Dozens martyred across Gaza Strip, including 2 near Aqsa Hospital. Also in our news, shocking video reveals occupation forces executing relief workers and medics in Rafah. Gaza's government media office calls it a war crime, and civil defense demands an international probe. Coming up as well, Sahrawi president holds talks with the UN's envoy. Polisario reaffirms the fight for independence, and the Spanish Communist Party urges Madrid to respect international law on Western Sahara. And later on, Trump takes his stand in the trade war with China, urging Americans to stand firm as Beijing hits 27 US companies with sanctions. Canada vows to confront Washington, while Guterres warns of the devastating consequences. The details shortly. 8 Palestinians, including women, a child, and a doctor, have tragically lost their lives in heavy bombardment on Shujaia, east of Gaza City. The Palestinian news agency reports that Zionist forces stationed on Al-Mintar Hill are relentlessly shelling the area, trapping residents with airstrikes and artillery fire. Families caught in the siege since Friday are calling on international organizations to step in as they flee the relentless violence. Similarly, on Saturday, at least 23 Palestinians were killed and dozens more were wounded in a wave of Zionist airstrikes across Gaza Strip. In Beit Hanun, north of Gaza, 6 were killed when warplanes bombed a group of displaced civilians on Naima Street, according to the Indonesian hospital. In Gaza City, 3 people were killed, including a woman, in renewed shelling, while 2 martyrs were reported from tent bombing and another woman in Zaytun. In Khan Yunis, 12 people were killed in multiple airstrikes, 6 in Qizan Rashwan, Thwera food pantry, and others in Al-Mawasi, Bani Suhaila, and the city center. In Rafah, 2 people were killed in residential areas, while 1 died in the Mirage area, and another succumbed to his wounds from an earlier bombing in Al-Nasr. In a drone strike near Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah, central Gaza, 2 Palestinians, a father and his son, were killed and others were wounded. Medical sources confirmed that the casualties were rushed to the hospital's emergency unit following the attack. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza reported that 60 Palestinians were martyred and 162 wounded within 24 hours, bringing the total death toll since October 7, 2023 to 50,669 martyrs and 115,225 injured. The ministry also confirmed that since the Zionist breach of the ceasefire on March 18, the toll has risen to 1,309 martyrs and 3,184 wounded. A video broadcast by the New York Times on Saturday reveals disturbing footage of Zionist forces deliberately executing medical, humanitarian personnel, and civil defense teams in Rafah. Captured by a paramedic, the footage shows the discovery of his own body in mass grave, alongside 14 other martyrs, all killed by occupation forces on March 23. For more on this story, here's Salman Assib.
A video investigation published by the New York Times has disproved Israel's version of a deadly strike that claimed the lives of 15 first responders, including members of the Palestinian Red Crescent, the United Nations, and the civil defense in Rafah. Recorded on March 23rd, the video shows ambulances and a fire truck, all with emergency lights on, being deliberately targeted despite their clear humanitarian markings. The UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Palestine, Francesca Albanese, condemned the attack, accusing the entity of trying to cover up the evidence.
The crime cannot be viewed in isolation, but must be seen as part of a broader pattern of genocide against the Palestinian people.
The Palestinian Red Crescent also responded to the footage, calling it undeniable proof that dismantles Israel's false narrative.
Our vehicles carried emergency lights and were clearly visible when fired upon. The occupation tried to hide the truth in black bags, but we are the witness and the proof.
Speaking Friday, the president of the Palestinian Red Crescent, Younes El-Khatib, confirmed the recovery of 15 bodies of doctors and rescuers found in a mass grave murdered by occupation forces. He revealed that a slain aid worker had captured the entire assault on his phone, further proving that the victims and their vehicles were clearly identified as humanitarian personnel.
I heard the voice of one of those team members who was killed, and his phone was found with his body, and he recorded the whole event. His last words before being shot: "Forgive me, Mom. I just wanted to help people. I wanted to save lives."
This incident marks yet another addition to the long record of violations committed by the Zionist occupation against humanitarian workers in Gaza. As pressure mounts, voices across the globe are now calling for accountability, urging the international community to bring the Zionist entity to justice for its continued war crimes.
In the same context, the Gaza government media office has strongly condemned the massacre of paramedics in Rafah, describing it as a blatant war crime. The office confirmed that the video highlights a heinous act by Zionist forces targeting medical and civil defense personnel in Gaza.
A newly released video documenting a brutal war crime has added to the growing list of atrocities committed by the Israeli occupation. It shows the deliberate execution of medical and humanitarian crews, as well as civil defense teams who were targeted in cold blood while performing their humanitarian duties to save lives. The footage clearly depicts a war crime planned and carried out with premeditation. The video also reveals that the ambulances and civil defense vehicles targeted in the attack had clear, illuminated signs indicating their humanitarian nature, with emergency lights flashing at the time of the strike. The evidence directly contradicts the Israeli occupation's false narrative, which claimed the vehicles approached in a suspicious manner without clear identifiers. The video exposes the lies of the Israeli war machine.
For its part, the Palestinian Civil Defense has urged the establishment of an international investigation committee to examine the targeting of paramedics by Zionist forces in Rafah. A spokesperson stressed that the disturbing video of the massacre exposes a deliberate ambush on medical teams, underscoring the urgent need to hold the occupation accountable for its unprecedented crimes. In response to Zionist claims regarding the execution of aid workers in Rafah, the Red Cross has vehemently refuted them, stressing that this attack is part of a disturbing trend of targeted attacks on humanitarian personnel in Gaza. Jagan Chapagan, Secretary General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, stated that the video broadcast by the New York Times dismantles the occupation's narrative, revealing 16 paramedics being directly targeted. He emphasized that there is no safe place or effective immunity for aid workers in Gaza Strip.
The relief workers were brutally killed and thrown into a grave. The ambulances in Rafah were destroyed and buried in the sand, and nearby the bodies of the relief workers were buried in large numbers. The paramedics thought that their ambulances marked with the Red Crescent emblem would clarify their purpose and that international humanitarian law meant something and would protect them. We cannot allow these attacks to become normalized.
In another story in Gaza still, the Zionist blockade on essential supplies like food, fuel and humanitarian aid is exacerbating the risk of a severe famine. Bakeries are particularly hard hit by the shortages, stress across food categories, putting the survival of the population in jeopardy. Zara Farjani has more.
Machines needing machines and ovens in Gaza's bakeries are at a standstill. The bakeries unable to stay open or guarantee even a few loaves of bread are now paralyzed. The Zionist blockade, compounded by the ongoing shortage of basic products and the lack of electricity and fuel, has made it impossible to keep the ovens running. Last Tuesday, the World Food Programme announced the closure of all its bakeries due to the blockade on humanitarian supplies.
Today, all the bakeries are closed because Israel is blocking the crossings. There isn't a single bag of flour, not a single bag of sugar. We have been told the humanitarian aid program will be suspended until the crossings reopen.
The food shortage extends far beyond bread, affecting all food products that Gaza's population depends on. The UN has issued a stark warning about the increasing risk of famine. The blockade on food, fuel and aid is driving severe shortages, leaving civilians in a desperate situation.
All our sources of income have disappeared. The prices of basic goods are sky high. Our children are hungry night and day. There is nothing for them to eat.
The situation is worsening because of the intensification of the blockade. There is a shortage of essential foods. People are relying on starchy foods for energy, which are now unavailable. This lack of nutrition is severely affecting people's health, hindering wound healing, and increasing the risk of infections and complications.
For 18 months, the people of Gaza have endured the Zionist genocide, which has reached unprecedented levels of violations of international law. This is ethnic cleansing, where all rules are disregarded and basic human rights are trampled.
Turning to African news now. On the second day of his visit to the Sahrawi refugee camps, UN Secretary General's personal envoy for Western Sahara, Staffan de Mistura, engaged in political talks with Sahrawi President and Polisario Front Secretary General Brahim Ghali. According to the Sahrawi news agency, de Mistura met with Ghali on Saturday evening for official discussions. The envoy also held continued talks with various Sahrawi actors and institutions. On Friday, the focus shifted to the situation of the Sahrawi detainees in occupation prisons, alongside the ongoing international campaign calling for their release. Still in relation to Western Sahara file, the Freedom March advocating for the release of Sahrawi political prisoners made its second stop in northeastern France on Friday. Mohamed Ali Zarwali, the Polisario Front representative in France, emphasized the campaign's importance, stressing the need for greater media coverage.
The path to freedom is a legitimate struggle. The Sahrawi people demand respect for their sovereignty over their land and call for an end to the occupation through legal means.
In parallel development, the Spanish Communist Party has strongly opposed Foreign Minister José Manuel Albaraz's endorsement of the autonomy plan for occupied Western Sahara. In a letter released on Friday, the PCE condemned his remarks as irresponsible, arguing they violate international law and UN resolutions. The party called on Spain to back Sahrawi self-determination and advance the decolonization process, reiterating the need for respect for international norms.
It is deeply concerning that Spain's foreign minister is prioritizing relations with Morocco at the expense of the fundamental rights of the Sahrawi people. Albaraz's position essentially legitimizes the occupation and oppression of the Sahrawis, ignoring the urgent need for justice and self-determination. As a nation with both legal and moral obligations, Spain must honor international resolutions and work tirelessly towards a just and peaceful solution based on self-determination and international law. Only through this commitment can lasting peace be achieved in Western Sahara.
In another major development, U.S. Customs has begun enforcing a 10% tariffs on imports, a controversial move initiated by U.S. President Donald Trump that has triggered a global market downturn. In response, China imposed sanctions on 27 U.S. firms, while Trump encouraged Americans to remain resilient amid the escalating trade war. Yasin Richter reports now.
A turning point in global trade. That's how observers are describing the day U.S. Customs began enforcing unilateral tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump. A blanket 10% tax on all imports from several countries, including the UK, Australia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Argentina. The tariffs, which took effect at midnight, are now being applied at ports, airports and customs warehouses across the US, with no grace period granted, except for preloaded sea shipments. Trump, addressing the move on Truth Social, urged Americans to show resolve, calling the trade war long, difficult but necessary and one that would eventually bear fruit for the US economy.
China has been hit much harder than the US, not even close. They and many other nations have treated us unsustainably badly. We have been the dumb and helpless, whipping post, but not any longer. We're bringing back jobs and businesses like never before. Already, more than $5 trillion of investment and rising fast. This is an economic revolution, and we will win. Hang tough. It won't be easy, but the end result will be historic. We will make America great again.
But the global financial markets didn't see it that way, plunging sharply after China's swift response and the US Federal Reserve raising concerns about inflation and slowed growth.
We'll continue to carefully monitor the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We're well positioned to wait for greater clarity before considering any adjustments to our policy stance. It is too soon to say what will be the appropriate path for monetary policy.
Meanwhile, Canada has pushed back, with Prime Minister Mark Carney labeling the move a major challenge, but also an opportunity to reshape Canada's economy.
On one level, what's going on with the tariffs, and we got, as you know, the auto tariffs this week from the United States, that's tough. That's tough. But this is an enormous opportunity for this company, for this country, and I think ultimately for America.
At the United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that the tariffs would have devastating repercussions, particularly for the world's most vulnerable economies, while Russia, though not directly targeted, warned of global market instability, with the Kremlin calling the economic reaction emotional but expected.
The global economy is reacting to these decisions with extreme emotion, as there is a relatively high level of turmoil in the markets and the global economy. The US administration has removed Russia from the list of countries on which new tariffs were imposed. A modest trade relationship has developed between Moscow and the United States. Global markets are witnessing turmoil and wide-ranging crack, including the rise and decline in prices of basic commodities, including oil, as fears of global economic recession are raised due to the new tariffs imposed by US President Donald Trump.
But it was China's retaliation that made headlines. Beijing imposed sanctions on 27 US companies, placing 16 on its export control list, accusing them of exporting dual-use civilian military goods, and another 11 on the unreliable entities list. China's foreign ministry defended the move as a matter of national security, while emphasizing that it welcomes foreign firms that respect its laws. Indeed, as the trade war deepens, tensions continue to ripple across the global economy, with markets rattled and governments scrambling to adapt.
Elsewhere in the Americas, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has sharply criticized the tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump, asserting that his government is prepared to confront them. Speaking from Caracas, Maduro stressed the necessity for the world to break free from U.S. hegemony, warning that Trump's policies are not only jeopardizing the global economy, but also stoking unnecessary trade tensions.
US President Trump took a set of tariff measures, taxes against all the countries of the world to defend the United States. And he has said that it is the day of liberation of the United States. I say the United States has to be freed from the world. Or is it the world that has to be freed from the United States? What is the truth?
Back in Africa, President of the National Unity Government in Libya, Abdelhamid Dbeibeh, has called for an end to the era of destruction and division in the country. In a powerful message on Facebook, he cautioned against repeating the devastating war on Tripoli, which he described as one of Libya's darkest chapters. Dbeibeh highlighted the staggering cost of the conflict, estimating losses between $30 to $42 billion. He detailed the destruction of 227 schools and 30 health facilities, a $9 billion loss in oil revenue, and a 41% contraction in GDP between January and September 2020. And in Algeria, civil society groups and human rights activists are ramping up calls for France to be held accountable for its colonial-era crimes. At a forum hosted by Al Mujahid newspaper on Saturday, marking the International Day of Victims of Anti-Personnel Mine Attacks, participants urged France to take responsibility for the legacy of landmines left behind during the colonial rule. They called on the French government to release maps of where these mines were planted, aiming to bring justice to the victims and address the ongoing impact of this unresolved issue.
The consequences of this were landmine victims. We used to have around 50 victims per year. In 2007, when the Chief of Staff of the French Armed Forces visited Algeria, he handed over some maps to the Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, but the maps provided did not reflect the reality. Why? First, the maps only covered the Maurice line and did not include the Child line. Second, there is difference between giving a map and saying this is a Child and Maurice lines, and giving me an engineering map, which would mean we know the exact locations of mines.
Elsewhere in Africa, violent clashes erupted west of Omdurman between the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces, with heavy weaponry being deployed. The army made significant advances, pushing towards the RSF stronghold at Kandahar market and securing control of the Salha suburb. The International Emergency Lawyers Organization accused the RSF of deliberately targeting civilians, with at least 80 reported dead in Omdurman. In a grim update, the Jama'iyya tribe reported 94 of its members killed, while around 3,000 people have fled to Jabal al-Awliya to escape the escalating violence. To the war in Ukraine file now, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported on Friday that a precision missile strike in Kryvyi, southeastern Ukraine, resulted in the deaths of approximately 85 foreign soldiers and officers during a meeting with Ukrainian leaders and foreign trainers. The strike also destroyed around 20 military vehicles. In addition, Russian air defense systems successfully downed 107 Ukrainian drones across several regions, including near the capital, Moscow. And now let's catch up on more international news stories making headlines in the News in Brief with Sufyan Kanturi.
Tunisian President Kais Saied vowed to continue the country's progress despite efforts to hinder it. In a cabinet meeting on Friday, he emphasized the need for proactive measures to prevent crisis and stated that those who fail in their duties will be held accountable. Thousands protested in Seoul on Saturday in support of former President Yoon Suk-yeol, who was ousted from office the day before following his brief and unsuccessful declaration of martial law. OPEC Plus members reaffirmed their commitment to addressing global oil market challenges without altering production policies. The Algerian Ministry of Energy stated that the committee is closely monitoring market development and stressed the importance of continued coordination among members to ensure effective implementation of joint measures. The deal to separate TikTok's US operations was halted after China rejected it. The plan, supported by US investors and the government, involved ByteDance retaining a minority stake. However, China opposed the deal after Trump imposed new tariffs.
And that wraps up our news program for tonight. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.